Crime and Cognition, episode 4. Episode 4. Doing it again. We're just going to keep this going until we get to like episode 400. We talked today about doing a couple of recordings and then releases, and I think what we kind of settled on was a recording about ourselves, about us as people, and what brought us to criminal justice, what brought me to being a criminal defense attorney, and what brought Katie to being a forensic psychologist. And
yeah, I think it's interesting to see kind of behind the scenes for various people's lives and experiences, and what was their trajectory that led them to where they are now. I think that's interesting. It's interesting to me, certainly, to figure out what kinds of positive and negative things happened to this person along the way, and what shaped their trajectory of events and led them to where they are now.
Yeah, and specifically us. And so for me, I guess that starts with my childhood and what that was like growing up in my family. I do want to say before I begin that my parents are lovely people, still alive, still married to each other, which maybe is a spoiler, but I don't want my recitation or of any of the facts of my young life, of my growing up years, to be a condemnation of my parents, more so just information relative to why I made the choices I made in life and what got me to where I am today. And so I want to be clear that this is not a bashing of my parents in any way. I fully and firmly believe that my parents did the best that they could with the information they had.
And I will chime in that your parents are very lovely people. I've had many occasions to hang out with them, and they are, unfortunately, we don't live in the same state, so I can only see them so many times a year, but they are very, very lovely people who've treated me just like family, and that says a lot.
So I guess I'll begin by saying that I was born in 1969 and grew up in the 70s during a time where drug use was, marijuana use and other recreational drugs was pretty accepted. Mm-hmm. As the late 70s came, that drug use turned into more for a lot of people, including my parents. And, if you can think of the full spectrum of drug use, all in one basket from my mom and dad, they did everything. They did everything in every way, from marijuana to PCP, angel dust, cocaine. I mean, like all the drugs, right? All the stuff that was on the street, right? I'm not sure they did heroin, but there was a lot of drug use. There was a lot of pill taking. There was a lot of in today's world, these are the kind of people I come into contact with sometimes in my practice. And in fact, I notice sometimes I'm caught off guard sometimes where courts and prosecutors and people will tend to dismiss or throw away these people as though they're broken permanently, right? Yeah. And having come from where I've come from and seeing my parents find recovery, which is part of my story I'll share in a bit, find healing, find ways forward, find ways to be better human beings, and have really just turned into regular, pretty normal people. It's frustrating sometimes to see prosecutors, to see judges, to kind of throw away people, say, whoa, they're doing drugs, I just, belong in jail forever. It's like, whoa, man. If someone would have come into my home, law enforcement would have showed up at my house, and we were affluent people, so we were able to avoid constant law enforcement interacting with our home. Because we lived in a neighborhood where that didn't happen, and we lived in a home where that didn't happen. We were affluent, and my parents had money, and my grandparents had money, so there wasn't this sort of surrounding interference in life by the government and law enforcement. And so my parents were rescued by family, not by interaction with the criminal justice system.
Yeah, and I think it's a good addition here that there's so much neurobiological research looking at the underpinnings of addiction. And that really debunks this idea that there's this sort of volitional reason why people continue to use, right? So just quit, just stop using.
When you say volitional, can you explain what
yeah,
that
like
means?
why are you choosing to keep using? And we know that the brain just doesn't work that way. Once someone goes down that path, and certainly there's this amalgam of events, this combination of all these events that happen with genetics and how someone grows up in their environment. But once someone starts using and they already have that proclivity, like their brain is wired that way because of genetic reasons, it's very difficult. In fact, that's an understatement for them to get off the path of drug use. It's incredibly, exceedingly difficult. Maybe that's a better way to describe it. And so this idea that, they just want to keep using, they just want to keep doing this and throwing their life away and destroying their relationships and all these things, it's simply not true. And that goes to this idea you were saying that these people are just, castaways. We should just exile them, or they're the lowest of the lows in society, and it's just not true with what we know about addiction.
Yeah, and I just my anecdotal one-person experience. That's what I saw in my parents. Right, it wasn't so easy to just stop. Right, they had to do some stuff. They had to work on some things and go through this process, and it took time and effort, and energy and focus, and frankly, it took a lot of people. It took my grandparents being involved. It took their brothers and sisters being involved and coming along on the ride, some of them. So, but I grew up in that kind of household. I grew up, I remember a story I share sometimes to sort of call out just how my growing up was. I remember the first concert I went to in my life was in 1981. It was Stevie Wonder, Hotter Than July. Or the first one I remember, I was actually at a Jethro Tull concert in 72 when I was like 3, but I don't remember that one. But Stevie Wonder concert, Hotter Than July, and down in the Centralplex in Baton Rouge, with my dad and I went, just he and I asked him how he got the tickets, and he reached under the seat and he pulled out a freezer bag full of Quaaludes, and said, I bought these from a guy and he gave me the tickets. And at 11 years old, I both knew what he was saying, I knew he was a drug dealer, so I knew that was a thing that he did, and I could identify the fact that those were Quaaludes. I knew what they looked like. Yeah. I knew what Quaaludes looked like. So I knew they weren't some other drug. I knew, Quaaludes. Or what they called them back then was Ludes. I was like, Ludes. Yeah. That's what I said in my head. I was like, cool, let's go to the concert. So yeah. I tell that story sometimes to say just how indoctrinated I was to drug culture, to drugs in my home at all times, marijuana being smoked every night, my dad, with his Tupperware thing, seeding, the marijuana he had to smoke or roll up in a joint and smoke. And I would sit on the couch and smoke with him because my parents, not only were they hippies, they were also inclusive, right? You didn't send your kids off when you decided to have a drink. For them, they were figuring out what it was like to grow up in the 50s with their parents drinking and being sent off and not being able to enjoy the fun and excitement. So they were like, no, we're just going to leave them here. But instead of drinking, it was marijuana. Mm-hmm. He was just smoking pot, And that's how it all started. It was just my parents smoking pot in the 70s.
I think we should also mention your parents' consent to this discussion.
Oh, yeah.
They are totally on board with the telling of their story, how they ended up here, their journey, so to speak. They are totally on board with your disclosure about this. I think that's important for us to say.
100% supportive.
Yeah.
They've expressed, in fact, a desire to have the story told because it's a story of triumph. It's a story of the overcoming difficulty. It's the story of the human spirit in my life because it's a story of recovery. It's a story of my parents finding a way forward that was positive and wonderful and supportive of their children. Of all of us, me and my two brothers, and so it, that's how it started. It started with marijuana. In the late 70s, early 80s, it became other stuff, and it got real funky. I mean, it got real funky. Like my parents separating, and my dad not being there. He was off working. He was building nuclear plants all over the United States at that time. He was a pipe fitter welder, and was traveling doing that stuff. And my mom was just chilling at the house, and And it was ugly. It was, we went a summer without an air conditioner in Baton Rouge, which is not an easy thing to do in Louisiana. Lots of June bugs in the house. Probably why I hate insects. But so there were some challenges for sure. We lived in this very regular, very nice neighborhood in Baton Rouge, and maybe we were the black sheep. I don't know. I felt like we were just. I didn't know any better, so I felt like we were just regular people, right? I just thought, this is how life is. This is what people do,
And you grew up with 2 older brothers.
I did.
So you were not an only child.
I did. My brothers were 5 and 6 years older than me, and they took a lot of care of me too. My oldest brother Aaron took a lot of care for me. My brother Jason, and in fact, when they took off in 79, 80, 81 time, that's when it actually got bad and all came to a head, because it was just me and my mom. My brothers had gone off. Aaron had gone off to college. Jason was in high school, and it was me and my mom left alone. And
there's no buffer.
Yeah, that got pretty bad. She would take me around to, I've said this before, this story before. She'd take me around to like cocaine houses with cats, and they'd go do the weird thing, and I would just sit in the living room with my school bag and sleep on the couch and wake up and go to school the next day. And
yeah,
that was weird for sure. That was a weird time. And it made me there are some gifts in there. Weird as that may sound, it made me an incredibly resilient human being. Yeah. I felt from the earliest age that you just weren't going to put me in a situation where I wouldn't survive, where I wouldn't figure it out, where I wouldn't find my way through. And I guess it was a product of just having to be that way, having to feel that way as a kid, It all kind of came to a head in December of 81. My mother either forgot or purposefully did not celebrate my birthday, which is December 6th, 1981. And she was just high. At that time, she was doing what's called roller coastering. She was taking a bunch of Quaaludes to go to sleep, a bunch of speed to wake up, a bunch of Quaaludes in the afternoon to take a nap, and a bunch of speed to wake up. And then she was just doing this.
Yeah, yo-yoing.
Yeah, this really, really bad use. And my dad wasn't around. He was traveling and out of town. And he would come back mid-December, which kind of all started the solution, the final solution to all this shit. But I remember that birthday. I remember her not kind of celebrating it, and I remember just kind of being chill about it. No presents or anything, obviously none of that, no cake or anything like that. I was 11, and I remember just kind of, my experience of it over the years was pissy, a little aggravated by it in later years. But at the time, I remember just kind of being like, oh, well, what am I supposed to do about it? Like, I didn't have any power to do anything about it. I couldn't go buy my own presents and my own cake, And I mean, we're talking about a time before cell phones. It wasn't like I could call up somebody or my grandmother or anything. And my dad would end up coming home a few days later from a work trip, and a series of events would occur where my grandmother would come over, then my aunts and uncles and people, and like all of a sudden there was this crash of human beings in my house. Probably based in some part on my mom forgetting my birthday, but
right, like that was the catalyst.
Like that could have been I didn't get it because I was just a little kid, so I was like, I just kind of was watching it happen. Nobody was like, "We're here to rescue you."
But they kind of understood the gravity of what was going on when they're like, how was Jared's birthday, or what was happening? What'd you do for his birthday? And then they probably understood the seriousness of like, oh. Right. Like,
yeah, I think that's probably possible because my mom's always been, super interested in taking care of her kids. She's been a good mom. She just got way off track.
She's so maternal.
Yeah, and I think maybe my grandmother saw that, and then they just kind of swooped in, and it was and then my great aunt was with her, and like the old ladies showed up.
So this was like an intervention.
Yeah. It was a full speed. Show up. We need to find some solutions here, and my grandmother and grandfather were very, very respected public people. They were my grandfather owned a bank. I mean, he was a very public man. He was a very upstanding person in the community.
And were you present for the intervention, or were you sort of sent to another room?
No, I was there. No,
you were there?
I was in it. Yeah, I was right there. I was watching them, tell her she was, doing all of her stuff that she was doing. But what happened was she ended up in treatment. Mm-hmm. In a chemical dependency unit treatment at the Baton Rouge General Hospital. in the Christmas-ish time of 81. And then during her treatment, my dad put himself into treatment. And my Uncle Jeff came and took care of me.
Yeah.
And which was funny because my Uncle Jeff was kind of high at the time too, but I guess he was least.
He was less high?
Less high.
I don't mean to make light
He would get
of
sober
it.
too. My Uncle Jeff's now been
Right.
sober for 40-something
Right.
years, or like 38
Yeah.
or 45 years, some crazy shit. He's been
It's-
sober forever. But at that
Yeah.
time, they was still caught up in this stuff, you know.
Yeah. So you were enveloped in this love from your family. Everybody swooped in, right, as you say, and
Yeah.
they really tried to help your mom, help your dad, and I would assume at the time that the treatment model was, hey, you can't just be in recovery and your spouse not be in recovery. You both need to be doing this.
Yeah, the treatment models. I'm going to trip you out with what happened at treatment here in a second, but
Yeah.
I think you're going to be really, really astounded about how they treated people in the 80s for drug and alcohol
I was not
addiction.
alive in the late 70s. I don't want to date myself, but I was not alive then. But if my understanding of what the treatment was kind of a hodgepodge. It wasn't as concrete as what we do now for treatment.
It was full on crazy, man.
Yeah.
They went to treatment, and I knew that it was the beginning of some healing in my family. I mean, I
Yeah.
knew even intuitively as a child, I knew this is going to be better. Like, this has got to be better, right? Like, they're going to get some information, and they're at the very least. And you know, my whole family, we have a very, very close, very large family. At that time, it was very, very close. My uncles and aunts were really, really close. My great uncles and aunts. I mean, we all gathered for Christmas and Thanksgiving and Easter, and you know,
Yeah.
I spent almost every weekend of my life at my grandmother's house because my parents were partying, so they would send me, and I'd come back during the week. But we went to treatment, and then treatment included this thing called Family Week, where they would put 2 or 3 people and their entire family in a room in a circle. And then the addict would get in the middle, like in front of their family, and they would just confront them with all the stories. Children, adults, it doesn't matter. And it was all this major confrontation of all the shit you've done to me. And it was not only your family, but like 2 other families in the room. So it was a real trip. We went through that, and there were some very, very adult disclosures during that I got to hear as an 11-year-old child.
Which we know now that's very developmentally inappropriate for
Oh, yeah,
kids to
it's
hear
super
these
funky.
stories. They just don't have the appreciation for some of these adult themes, or
Right,
you know,
that's right.
how these things unravel. I mean, especially discussions that involve really adult things,
Yeah,
drug
this
use
was
and sex, and
sexual
things like
behavior and that kind
Sure.
of stuff. I mean, adult sexual behavior between adults, but as a child, when you're hearing that, you're like, "What's going on?" But with my parents, you know, they're
Yeah.
just. I mean, it's laughably inappropriate now, right? I mean, it's crazy that occurred. But in the early '80s, we were just kind of figuring this out.
Right.
There was no I guess there was no defined manner in which to do that, so they just rolled it all out in front of everyone.
These treatment models, they
Yeah.
did. There wasn't a lot of peer-reviewed literature, I would imagine, for them to fall back on. So it was like these treatment centers pop up, and it's like, well, we're going to do this thing.
Yeah.
Maybe they're pulling some things that are research-based, but then we're just going to try this new thing here, and this is our model.
And it was being run by therapists, right? Not by doctors. I
like
know-
master's level clinicians.
Yeah.
Sure.
I know that to be the case. I mean, I remember the guy who was my mom and dad's therapist counselor. They called them counselors at the time. We knew each other for years because I eventually would get sober, and that's part of the story, right? So we went
Yeah.
in 81. My parents stopped using. They don't really participate in AA or recovery at that time. They kind of just cessation is enough, right? Not
Yeah.
using is enough, and and it wasn't, obviously, right? There continued to be just serious dysfunction in the home, and you know, not really great stuff. I started using in 83-ish, 84-ish, when I was 15. Close to 84, 85, actually. I started getting marijuana from different locations, and I had been kind of stealing some of my parents' marijuana for a while, right before they went to treatment. But when they stopped and that wasn't in the house, I started to try to find my own.
I'm shocked that you didn't start using earlier. when kids grow up in environments where there's a lot of drug use and how normalized it was, especially in your household,
Yeah.
kids start in their preteen years, oftentimes using drugs. So I'm hearing you say that it really wasn't until you were 15 that it became regular. I'm kind of shocked you made it that far, that there wasn't an earlier age of onset.
Yeah, it's interesting. I didn't do any hard drugs. I didn't do anything but smoke marijuana because I was so scared of drugs.
Yeah.
I had such a fear that I would end up like my parents, and they were so grossly dysfunctional during that time. I was just like, no way.
Sure.
I don't want to do any drugs, and I refused every time I was offered. And I was offered a lot of drugs as a kid,
That's usually the
cocaine or
gateway.
acid or this or that, whatever was around back then. And I just steadfastly was like, no thanks,
Yeah, it's not uncommon to see that. Some kids grow into that trajectory, which is this seeing their parents unravel in this way, and is a major deterrent to drug use. And so you held off.
I did
until you were about 15, and then you started.
Yeah, and then I started smoking marijuana and drinking, lots of alcohol, right? Because my parents didn't really drink. I didn't see them. My dad did apparently, but I didn't really see that. All I saw was the drug use of my mom, really. And so I began to drink, and I quickly got myself into trouble. Like straight away got into trouble. In February of '86, I got arrested for stealing alcohol because I was doggone 16 years old, couldn't go buy alcohol. And so I was stealing it. Took a bottle of liquor, and off-duty police officer saw me do it and pulled me over. And he didn't arrest me. They didn't arrest people back then, He called my dad, or he actually sent a police officer to my dad's house to get my dad. My dad drove over to where we were, and that was pretty ugly. That was a pretty bad deal. I thought he was going to beat my ass. He never put his hands on me though, but he would.
Referring to your dad, right?
Yeah. He never put his hands on me. He didn't believe in corporal punishment, but the threat of getting my ass beat was there. The threat of getting beat up was there. Was plenty sufficient to scare me. And what actually happened was that was January 27th or 28th of 1986. I get arrested, go home. My dad's like, your whole life's going to change. I go to school the next day. A friend of mine gives me what would today be like 1.5 pounds of marijuana. Not an ounce. I mean like a bag like this big, full of marijuana. I put it in my jacket. It was cold in Louisiana. I actually get called into the office with this marijuana in my jacket. And I'm sitting in the office, and I got this marijuana in my jacket, and I'm getting ready to get in trouble, and then the space shuttle blows up. On TV, in the office, while I'm sitting there, and that became the focus.
The Apollo space shuttle.
No, not Apollo, the space shuttle. Apollo is the one that went to the moon. The space shuttle with Krista McAuliffe on it, the school teacher. She was the first non-astronaut to go into space on the space shuttle.
What was it called?
Atlantis.
Oh, but there was another one that blew up too, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
This was the first one. This was in 87.
Okay.
86. This was in 86. And January 28th or 29th of 86. And so that became the focus of everyone in the office, and I no longer was the focus, and it was really cool because I was real chill with it because I had all this marijuana.
The heat was off of you.
Oh my God.
Wow.
So ridiculous. And then I go home and I realize that scared the crap out of me because I knew that if I got caught with all that marijuana at school that the police were going to get called again, and that was going to be bad. And my uncle at the time was a district judge, and I knew I could get out of maybe getting pulled over for stealing a bottle of liquor, but bringing 1.5 pounds of marijuana to school was gonna be something I probably couldn't get out of.
What did you do with it afterwards?
I actually threw it away. We were only talking about like $100 worth of marijuana at the time, right? It's not like it is today. And I threw it away. It was probably grass clippings. It was probably like yard clippings anyway. Probably. I don't know what it was. Who knows what it was? I mean, I didn't know. I was a kid, And I went home and I told my parents, I have to go to treatment. I'm like, I got to go to treatment. That's what I got to do. I got to go to treatment. Because they had been to treatment. I was like, if I go to treatment, I'm going to get out of trouble.
Oh, I was going to say, it's interesting to me that you like pathologized yourself and
Oh,
you thought
no.
you needed to go to treatment, because if a teenager walks into my office and their parents are talking about this and the teens talking about, they disclose this kind of drug use with me, I'm going to think this is experimental. This is very likely a phase, right?
Yeah.
And we're gonna work on this. We're gonna talk about what we need to do to intervene and set some expectations, and a lot of parenting therapy, a lot of family therapy.
Right.
But my first thought is not going to be
Institutionalized.
Immediately send this kid off, right? It's
Yeah.
going to be, let's focus on this family unit and see what happens to the youth as we go along that route. But you went hard into, send me off to treatment.
Just for the point of getting out of trouble. I'd watched my parents go from being in a mess of a disaster to everybody coming to rescue them and, oh, it's going to be okay. And I was like, oh, I know what I'll do. I'll go to treatment, and everybody will swoop in,
right,
and it'll be okay, and I will get out of being in trouble.
Yeah.
I'll get out of this thing of stealing this bottle of liquor and being a degenerate, and I'll get out of, like, everything will be cool. And so on the afternoon of February the 2nd of 1986, I checked into the TOSS Center in Baton Rouge treatment facility, and February 3rd, 1986 was my sobriety date for a long time. Because I went to treatment and I realized, okay, I'm an alcoholic. And I don't know if I really bought it, but what I bought was, if I keep using and drinking and doing what I'm doing, I certainly don't have any chance of being successful in life.
So you came to that realization much sooner than a lot of teenagers do who engage in experimental drug use or alcohol use, right? There's usually a cessation in the in the U.S. culture in the college years, kind of right around the time of college graduation, shortly thereafter. So we're talking like early to mid 20s. You just were on an accelerated timeline because of this, largely, I would think, because of this treatment model, and they're pathologizing you. They're telling you you're an alcoholic.
Exactly.
Right. To me, it just feels very severe. I wouldn't immediately say to, parents who bring their child in to see me, like, yeah, your kid has alcohol use disorder.
He's messed up.
It's really going to the severe end there in my mind. Yeah. But it ultimately, the path you took, whether it was that or growing out of it, your path led to sobriety.
Yeah, and about 3 days in, I think, of being there, I was like, oh no, I really need this. This is the path forward for me. Right?
Yeah.
And whether or not I was scared of becoming something, right? Whether or not I was moving away from danger, that sort of psychological idea of moving away from danger or moving toward a better life. I think it was a combination of both, that I thought, I'm just not going to be happy. And there's just too many pitfalls. There's too much stuff over here. I don't want to be subject to the criminal justice system ever again. I don't want to have any judge looking at me and telling me that I need to do something or not do something ever again. I don't want a police officer handcuffing me ever again. I immediately was like, no. I don't. This is not the kind of life I want to live.
Then you started to really lean into sober living.
Big time. Like, I worked the steps when I was in treatment, and the steps in AA. The steps in AA, there's these 12 steps, and it can really be sort of summarized for me as, admitting I needed help, sort of digging around in my life to see where I'd really screwed it up, and apologizing for doing so, owning my errors, owning my mistakes, owning the stuff I had done, and trying to figure out how to be of service, trying to figure out how to live a decent life and be of service to other people. And that's really sort of the whole model of AA, right? That's the 12 steps in a condensed version. And I began to work those steps. I really embraced AA. I embraced going to meetings. There was a huge young people's movement in Baton Rouge at that time. There was a meeting at a golf course of all places, and in a golf course clubhouse, and it was a young person's meeting. And I walked in there. I think the first time I stayed in treatment for 28 days, and I walked out and walked into a meeting. And when the first time I got there, there was 30 or 40 young people in this meeting. and a bunch of cute girls. I was like, this is definitely the place for me.
Going back there.
I'm coming back here tomorrow. But it was fun. It was like,
Yeah.
it was a place to go. Like I had
Yeah.
I had a team, right? I had a set of people where I could go and we could all talk about, how silly we were and doing the behavior we did. And there were nice guys there we could be friends with. There was cute girls I could talk to, and it was great. It was a community, and I really got into that community in Baton Rouge. And I stayed in those meetings. I went to 1 or 2 a day, every day.
Yeah. Yeah, the research on AA is very clear about the people that lean into it. For those participants that are super into it, and as they call it, working the steps, they really devote themselves to this path of sobriety. It's incredibly successful for those folks.
Yeah.
For folks who are really wishy-washy, who have a lot of unresolved emotional issues and are not working on those simultaneously, or are kind of leaning out of the model, not leaning in, it's way less successful.
Super ineffective.
Yeah, the data's all over the place. But when people lean into it, AA is great.
And I kind of saw that, honestly. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
being in and out of these rooms for so many years. We stayed in Louisiana for about 1.5 years, and then we moved to Nashville in '87. And my life took a different turn, and we'll talk about that in a second. But it really was. I was a member of a community,
Yeah.
And I some of those people I got sober with at that time, I am still friends with. I still know them today.
Yeah.
There are 2 or 3 of those people that I could call on my cell phone. We're talking about '86. I mean, that's a long time ago, nearly 40 years ago, and these are people that I'm still in touch with. I mean, we got close. And we got and together, many of us stayed sober for a long, long time. I stayed sober for 16 and a half years.
I was going to say, how long was that for you?
The second half of my life, actually. I got sober when I was 16 and a half, and I stayed sober for the second half of my life.
Okay.
At that point, so when I was 33 or so, when
Yeah.
I actually decided to start drinking again, I had been sober for the second half of my life at that point. So I grew up sober. I grew up in AA. I grew up with a bunch of parents. My own parents, we'll talk about in a second, got really healthy, got into recovery, got really healthy, and really started working on themselves in life. And so I had my own parents, but also had a bunch of parents in AA. It was really great.
Yeah.
I had friends in AA. I had older people. I had sponsors and people that, AA is a little, is maybe not the most effective way to stop drinking, but I'll tell you what, there's something very, very special about if you're feeling bad or something's going on with you, go to a meeting, sit down, open your mouth and say something, and 5, 6, 7, 8 people in there who've been around, who are older,
Yeah.
who know what they're doing, who've lived more life than you, say, hey, you know what? I've been where you are, man. I know how you feel.
That's so validating.
God,
There's
man.
such a robust social support network that comes with it, and I think that's where the research on this is. The backing is that there's this safety net of people, especially the idea of having a good sponsor. And not all sponsors are created equal, but having a sponsor, but then the group at large going to a meeting.
Yeah, and the way that AA is set up is, you don't give advice, you share stories.
How validating.
Right?
That's wonderful.
So people you'd say something that was going on with you, and someone would say, you know what, man? I know how that feels, because there's just one time that I was doing this thing, and this is what I did to get out of it, and it might work for you, and I did this, and I did that. And so, and the older people around, if someone would get, well, what you need to do is, the older person would be like, no, stop. No, you stop. We don't give advice here. You don't tell somebody what to do. If you want to share a story of your own life or share of what's going on with you, share that. But this is not a place for you to tell someone what to do.
Well, that's shaming.
And it's also acting like like I don't know. You don't know anything. Just
Right.
And so
Right.
that environment was also super accessible.
Yeah.
Because I didn't go and have people tell me what to do. Like, oh shit, like these people are going to judge me. I just went and people were like, man, 3 years ago when I was feeling that way, this is what I did, man, and it worked. It helped.
Yeah.
It really helped and worked. It made me feel better. It was like, and that's a really neat thing. I mean, like I used to think when I stopped going to AA meetings and got out of the program, I used to think this would be really great for people. Like if you could have a group where you could just go to at night and just be like, all right, this is what's going on, with people be like, oh man, I feel that because I went through that shit too.
Therapist here. This is my job. This is what we do.
I know. There's some power in group therapy, though, right? There's some power in that group.
Yeah, group therapy is wonderful. But also, as you're saying this, I'm like, yeah, as a therapist, this is my job to be unconditionally supportive and validate my patients and, build them up, be their cheerleader. I am subjective. I'm on their side. And so, it's powerful.
We've talked about this. You don't like jam advice down people's throat. You listen to them and open up their ability to understand where they're at and kind of let them find ways forward.
Yeah.
That's super empowering.
Yeah, giving directives is a very specific kind of therapy that I do when somebody's in need of a lot of skill building. Like if somebody's agoraphobic and they're not leaving the house, or they're having panic attacks every time they try to leave, we're going to do some really intensive skill building with directives. But when I've been working with some folks for years and years, and you exhaust the techniques, you've done them, and then we're just processing things together. And so at that point, there's not many directives. What I'm doing is I'm validating. Well, you do that from the outset. You validate from day one. But it's nice. The Socratic questioning method is a wonderful way to approach therapy, I find.
Yeah. And that's kind of what AA is in its best form.
Yeah.
Is a really neat place to go and just kind of hear other people's stories, and you take what works for you and you leave the rest of it here. I mean, that's an adage in AA. Take what works and leave the rest.
Yeah.
So you take what works for you and you try to go figure it out, and you learn how to live life. And for people like me, I hadn't been given a whole lot of life skills by my parents. They were busy surviving. Right? They're busy in survival mode and trying to figure themselves out. And so I didn't get a lot of information. So I went into AA, man, and I found a ton of information just about how to be a better person.
Yeah, it's like it facilitated your maturity in a lot of ways.
Yeah. And I grew up in these meetings from 16 to 32 years old. I actually stopped going around 27, 28, stopped going to regular. I still went, but I stopped going all the time. Yeah. 3 or 4 a week, 5 a week.
What happened at age 32?
I'd gotten a relationship at that time, a marriage, and had some kids, and frankly just got busy in life.
Yeah.
My wife at that time drank, and so it was. But she supported my sobriety. She didn't try to make me drink or anything. But there wasn't a whole lot of space in that relationship, the dynamic that we had. Mm-hmm. There wasn't a whole lot of space for Jared to take off and go do a meeting and take care of himself or whatever. So I diminished my attendance in meetings for many, many years, for 4, 5, 6, 7 years, something like that. But I'll reverse a little bit and come back a bit to the early 90s when we moved to Nashville. The family moved to Nashville, 87, 88. I got into a relationship with the woman that would become my first wife. Mm-hmm. Wonderful, wonderful human being who really opened up this world of personal growth seminars to myself and my entire family. And we all got involved in this personal growth seminar thing called the ISA experience, and it's no longer functional, but it was this sort of self-actualization seminar, right? How to sort of take ownership for yourself, self-actualize growth, and how not to be a victim, those kinds of things, right? Mm-hmm. Get out of victim mentality, get into proactive, being active about taking care of your life, being the sort of master of your own life. And of course, that's oversimplification of a really incredible experiential seminar that we attended together. I went first with my first wife. Then one of my brothers, my oldest brother, who had also gotten sober, my oldest brother, who'd gotten sober with me just very, very soon after I did in 86. He did it, and then my parents, and then my other brother, and then my aunts, and my uncle. And they're like all kind of people got involved. But the core group of my family, my mom and dad, my brother Aaron, and myself, we lived in Nashville, all of us together. We really got into this thing together, and no matter the nature of the thing itself, what it facilitated was my parents and I, personally, for me, sitting down and looking each other in the face and saying, this is what you did as a child that really sucked. And this is what you did as a child that really sucked. And I love you and I forgive you for it. And them looking at me and saying, man, wow, like this is what I did. And it really sucked that I did that to you. And I'm sorry that I did it. And I hope you forgive me for that. And you know what, Jared? This is what my parent did to me. And this is the experience I had as a child too that led to some of that. And it wasn't an excuse, but boy, it sure was a reason. And it sure was some clarity for me. It was like, oh, my parents are human too. My parents are just people too that had these same life difficulties and challenges, and it had brought all that into being parents at a very, very young age.
Yeah, these things didn't occur in a vacuum. This is the
course.
context that was really helpful for you to process this and humanize your parents.
Yeah, they were just regular
Yeah.
people, you know. And
Yeah.
here I was, this adult. I'm in my mid-20s, early 20s at the time, I think. And all of a sudden, we went to this together. We did this like advanced top-level seminar, this week-long seminar together, experiential, every day, all day long. And I got to really see them as people. I got to really experience my mom and dad as just regular people, just going through life, trying to do the best they could too. Sure, they got off track with drugs. Sure, that was a serious mistake that had its own life and its own sort of heartbeat, right? But when that thing went away, and it did, then they stayed off of drugs. They came back to life and they began to try to figure out who they were. They really started to figure out, like, okay, how can we be better? How can we fix this shit? You know,
Those nuances are so important when I work in family dynamics where there's a lot of pain in this parent-child relationship, is helping each party understand the context, particularly the adult child of the in the relationship, is contextualizing some of their parents' behavior. It's not excusing it, but it's a nuanced understanding of how did my parent get to where they are? What experiences did they have that shaped their worldview and led them to this point? And I think it helps diminish a lot of the resentment.
it did. It cleared up the sharpness of the memories and pain. You know, it made it not so sharp, pointy ended. You know, it made it to where I could sort of deal with it and understand it in a way where I could get past the intense feelings and maybe to some underlying stuff. And look, it wasn't all roses. I mean, I remember at 19 or 20 or 21 walking into my parents' living room and telling them that I'd canceled my relationship with them. I remember the day I did. I walked in, I was like, that's it. I'm done with y'all. You're not my parents anymore. I don't give a shit. I don't want any money from you. I don't want anything from you. I don't want any advice. I just want you to leave me alone. And I left. And you know, we would reconcile. But so it wasn't all smooth and hunky dory, right? There was some conflict in there. There was some pushback by my dad, specifically by my dad at sometimes about, how, it wasn't that bad. I was like, whoa, pal, because it wasn't as bad as your childhood was. Don't mean it wasn't bad for me. And like, this is my childhood and it's my experience and it's meaningful. And we'll talk about that in a minute as well.
The danger of comparisons.
Yeah, of comparing one to the other, right? Well, it wasn't as bad as mine, so shit, you shouldn't be that upset. It's like, no. It was, for me, the worst possible, or as bad as it was. I mean, because it was the only thing I knew. Right? So it wasn't all roses for sure. There was some conflict in there for years, but we figured out how to work through the conflict, right? That only took me a couple of weeks to come back and be like, all right, I love y'all, I want you to be my parents. Oh yeah, I do want some money, but
did things change?
It could have been a feature of my coming home.
What teenager isn't going to ask for money or laundry or things like that? It's pretty status quo. But did things change for the family, your family unit specifically, after the week-long seminar that you guys did?
Oh yeah, we got close. We got really close. Yeah. The cancel my relationship with them was prior to those things happening. That really changed it, and they were participating in this seminar at a very high level, helping to put it on. After we did it together, we all helped to put one on for other people. That was a really neat growth process too. Like hanging out with my mom and dad as peers and trying to put this seminar on and make the space really sweet and loving and tender for other people.
Yeah,
that was a really neat process of giving and being of service, and so I think since then, really, with a few normal life kind of speed bumps and bumps along the way, little bumps along the way, my relationship with my parents has been incredibly strong since then. And that was in the early 90s. That was 93, 94, 95. So we're talking about 30 years of very, very successful, very sweet, loving relationship with my parents. Which is great, and it's really, it is the sort of corpus of things. I was blessed enough that even though I had a really difficult childhood with some real serious, serious drug use, serious drug problems, serious consequences of drug use and crazy things going on around me, that my parents were also the kind of people who got off drugs and then began to work on themselves.
Yeah,
they participated in the mending of our lives.
Yeah, that level of insight is so paramount when it comes to healing, and in the psych world we would even say self-actualizing. Right. People who are self-actualized are capable of insight and modifying their behaviors and changing their trajectory in life, if you will. Yeah. And so that's really a testament to your parents' tremendous level of insight, both of them, and then together as a unit.
No doubt.
I'm curious, you fell off the wagon when you were 32.
Right.
And then when did you go back on it?
So I went back to drinking after basic training, actually. 9/11 happened in 2001, and I joined the Army 40 days after 9/11. And then I shipped out to basic training in January of 2002. And then I got hurt in basic training, had to come home. And during that period in which I was recovering, I think I decided I had been sober the second half of my life at that point. I'd been sober for 16 and a half years, and I decided I wanted to drink. I was like, I feel like I've moved on from this. I feel like I've overcome this challenge. I've done all this growth, I've fixed all these, all this hurt and pain with my parents, and I feel like I'm a healthy person, and I feel like I can have a drink and be successful with it. So I had a margarita, of all things. I don't know why I wanted doggone tequila and sweet lime juice, but I did, and that's what I drank. I remember the first drink. I actually remember taking it, sipping it, and I drank for many years after that. For many years, almost 20 years actually. Yeah. From then, which was 2002 until 2016. 2016, December of 2016, when I once again was not being successful drinking, was really drinking in a way that was not supporting my life. It didn't feel consistent with who I was as a person. I felt like my focus on my every once in a while focus on drinking, if it was a lunch on a Wednesday with some lawyers, or if it was a Saturday night football game with LSU, or was going out with my buddies, or it just felt like a more focus than I really needed to give something that was external to my life like that felt inconsistent with. And actually, my wife at the time asked me one time, I was drunk somewhere, and she said, is this really who you are? Is this who you want to be, Jared? Yeah. I mean, look at your behavior this evening, and we had gone out together, and some dudes had gotten in a fight next to me, and as opposed to taking her and keeping her safe, I did what my normal, pretty, semi-intoxicated self did. I went straight at these cats and grabbed one of them, and because I liked to get in fights when I was drunk, I liked I just liked it. I liked that thing. That's part of my intoxicated brain is, oh, look, there's a fight. I think I'll go over there and involve myself.
Oh, that's exciting.
Yeah, it's exciting. That'll be fun. Yeah. Woohoo! Yeah, whatever, Yeah. And it wasn't even about thinking I could beat everybody up, because good Lord knows I've taken some beatings. I've gotten my ass whipped. It was just that I wanted to go be involved. I was like, all right, let's go. Woohoo! Yeah, it's fun. And so I did that night. Yeah. This thing happened, and she says that first of all, is who you want to be. You're a lawyer. You're this business owner. You're respected in the community. Do you want to be the kind of guy that runs toward a fight between a couple of college kids? I mean, right. What? Like, right. What are you doing? Like, is this who you want to be? And do you want to be focused on drinking? Like, do you want to lose your faculty? If that's not who you want to be, then you're consuming alcohol, and that's changing you into something you don't want to be. Right. And it really struck me, man. It was a really strong message to me. Followed by her picking me up, sitting next to my car at 3:00 in the morning on December the 23rd of 2016, where I'd gotten super drunk, really, really drunk, which is something I would do sometimes, just get super drunk. And I wouldn't drive because I was not stupid. I don't want to lose my law license, so I wouldn't drive, I wouldn't get in the car and drive. So I went and sat down next to my car, and I was just sitting there. Yeah. I don't know what time it was. And she pulls up with our infant daughter, and she's like, picks me up. She's real sweet about it. Picks me up, takes care of me, brings me to the house. Wakes up the next morning. She just says, "That's it, pal. You're either going to quit or I'm leaving." I was like, "Oh, shit.
Yeah.
Oh, wow, this is serious business." And so I put it away at that time.
Yeah.
You know, I drank a handful of times from 2016 to 2022. And then summer of 2022, I just decided, I drank, I think, 10 times in 6 years.
Yep.
And then in 2022, in the summer of 22, I had a glass of wine in New York with some friends and on a business trip. And I was like, this isn't working for me anymore.
Mm-hmm.
This is no reason. Like, there's no reason for me to flirt with disaster in any way, shape, or form. There's no reason for me to do something that might result in a cascade of events, or I get in a fight again at my age, or I do something that risks my law license or risks my ability to help people to live this life of service that I want to live, that I'm living. And something that would interfere with that makes no sense. It just didn't make any sense to me anymore. Alcohol stopped making sense.
One of the first times you and I went out, I remember you saying to me, alcohol is not a feature of my life. You said it so seriously. And I think pre-therapist Katie might have been like, whoa, like that's okay. But I actually work a lot with my own therapy patients to help them set boundaries with others in terms of their own sober, curious, or sober lifestyle. And I remember thinking when you said that alcohol is not a feature of my life and will not be a feature of you and me. And I remember feeling heartened by that. I felt like, wow, what an amazing level of confidence. My respect for you was already high. It shot through the roof. And I think whereas some people might feel intimidated by that kind of really, it was a forceful, it wasn't a request. It was like a disclosure. It was like, this is me.
This is my boundary. This
is my boundary.
This is where I live.
I'm resolute.
Yeah.
And I just remember thinking like, wow, this is great. Yeah, I love this. This is awesome.
That's great.
Of course, I have a different experience with alcohol, but which was, we can certainly talk about that later, but or we can talk about it now. I don't know, because we talked about how alcohol fits into our relationship, right? Or rather, the lack thereof.
Right. Of course, yeah. Why don't you share your in this context? Why don't you share your experience?
Well, yeah, just in this
life
context
experience of alcohol and where you came to your decision. We neither of us consume alcohol. Is the punchline.
The punchline is we don't. And
but what does that look like for you? How did you come to that? And it wasn't a request by me. I set that boundary for myself and for saying that whatever we did together at the time we were going to date or hang out or whatever, that alcohol was not going. I wasn't going to consume alcohol. And it was sort of my preference that alcohol not be a feature of what we did together. Like that wouldn't be some central piece of it.
Yeah, but you were so respectful of whatever my choice was. You never
100%.
imposed that on me. Within a month of our dating, weeks actually, I decided I didn't want to drink anymore. I did not have a problematic relationship with alcohol. I drank, sometimes it was 1 drink a week, sometimes it was 2 drinks a month. It was really variable. It was, and sometimes more frequently. Sometimes it was 3 or 4 drinks a week, but that was a rare thing. Probably more so when I lived in New Orleans, when I was in grad school, but that was really the exception to the norm for me. And I had been what I would call sober curious for a long time. I had wanted to explore this idea of, I wonder what it's like for me to engage in total cessation of alcohol use. Just because I was so sensitive to it, one strong drink, and I would feel the after effects the next day. I think my tolerance, this is probably just genetic, but my tolerance would go down and down as I aged. And so I would often ask myself, why did I have a drink last night? and it would really only be one drink. Why did I have a drink last night if I knew I'm going to feel this way today? I wanted to do all these things, and I wanted to, maybe I wanted to work out, or I wanted to be super productive. And it was always on a weekend night. I wouldn't really do anything like that on a work night.
And I remember early in our relationship, the few times that you did drink.
Yeah.
I remember that. I remember you sharing that with me the next day, like, I feel it. Like, I feel you're so, to be clear, you are so healthy that your level of health is so high that just the general toxicity of alcohol has an actual deleterious effect on you.
Yeah, it did. And so when I say sober curious, that's what I mean. I was this idea of like, I wonder what it would be like to stop. And I didn't really have anything that pushed me over the edge until I met you. And I decided, a couple things. Number one, my alcohol use was just so inconsistent with my lifestyle. Now, our lifestyle. I work out 5 to 6 days a week. We work out 5 to 6 days a week now. But when we started dating, I was doing that independently. It was just totally inconsistent with my health goals and my fitness goals. And then...
and even your diet. I mean,
my diet,
your diet's really on point. So to add that consumption of that chemical also seemed, to me, incongruent with your diet. I mean,
caloric intake, but also how it affected me.
Right.
Again, with just one glass of wine or, one beer. I did love beer. I loved stouts and IPAs and really hazy beers. And so I had an appreciation for, maybe it was the high gravity things that sent me over into that hangover territory. But so we are together for less than a month, and I decided, this is inconsistent with what I want. Around that time, we also found out that my mom was suffering from some form of dementia. And I decided I want to completely mitigate my risk for dementia because my mother has, now we know it's Alzheimer's. My maternal grandmother, so my mom's mom, also had Alzheimer's. And so it was just this compendium of things where I said, this is not working for me. And what a great way to support my partner. What a great way for me to support you and honor your path of sobriety by having an alcohol-free house.
Which blew me away. I mean, literally blew me. And I had told you a number of times, sweetheart, you are free to have any relationship with alcohol you want. I mean, like, that's not up to me. That is your thing.
Right.
But I was... And I remember actually when you told me that you were not going to drink, I even was like, "Are you sure? Like,
right?
Like, okay, are you really? Like,
it was foreign to you.
I didn't understand. Like, I didn't really get it, And even a month or two afterwards, I still would ask sometimes, like, "Are you still like? Is that you still on that thing where you're not going to drink? And you're like, "Yeah, this is it's pretty much a lifetime thing. Like, I've decided that in this relationship with you, that's not going to be a feature of my life." It was very interesting, and it's really incredibly generous and sweet. I think I felt it that way, at least from you, that it was an act of love, an act of generosity and understanding, and I took it as a really sweet act of love and kindness.
Yeah, it was you. You were the catalyst.
Yeah.
You were the impetus that drove me over from being sober curious to now. Yeah, I really like being sober, and I haven't had a drink in about a year now.
Yeah, that's
and I will say the first several months I would kind of have a stressful day at work or whatever, and my mind would go to that place of like, oh, a nice cold beer would feel good right now, and that lasted for about 4, 5, 6 months maybe.
Sure.
And then I just stopped thinking about that. I just stopped having those thoughts. At the end of the day, now it was just, okay, that was a stressful day, but like, what's next? Or I need a hug from you, or whatever it might be, or from our kids, or it was just something different.
And a big part of our connection, a big part of our life is physical fitness.
Yeah.
And physical acumen, physical ability, diet, smart diet. We were having just a conversation last night about red meat. We talk intelligently about what food we want to eat and when we want to eat it, and do we want to balance this with this, and how often do we, we had a discussion about red meat, about not eating it that often, and you want to eat it a little less often than I do, but I've learned and taken, we're the kind of people that have discussions about things and then we exchange studies research studies. Oh, look at this study. Well, honey, look
Sorry.
at this study, honey. It's kind of ridiculous.
You married a researcher.
But
Sorry.
it's fun. But it's fun. I love it. I love it. I mean, I'm a doggone attorney. You know, I live my whole life on jurisprudence, right? On what the research, the law says. You know, and so it's fun. We exchange these things, and I've learned from you this, like, okay, I don't have to have bacon every day for breakfast, and I don't have to have a doggone steak all the time. We made spaghetti with chicken. That was good. That was super yummy too.
Yeah.
So we're learning. But I say all that to say, a big focus of our life is hitting the gym 5-6 days a week, eating really well. You know, watching when we eat, smaller meals in the late evening so we don't spike insulin and glucose. I mean, we are very, very cognizant of health, long-term longevity, making decisions today for 10, 20, 30 years from now.
Yeah, and tying it back into alcohol, it just didn't fit in for me.
That construct.
Into that construct, especially then adding on the layer of my maybe genetic risk for dementia.
Sort of pivoting back to the story, my parents and I had been of service. We not only did the seminar, but then we helped put it on as assistants to put this thing on. And that was a real service role. And there was something to be learned from being of service to people as they went through that experience that was different than going through the experience itself. And that really, for me, opened up what became the purpose of my life. Mm-hmm. And so in that seminar with my parents, this advanced seminar, one of the processes, one of the things you did well into the week was there was at least an attempt or an assertion that to discover your purpose in life, to find out, and there was this whole long process of how to sort of dig into this. What is it that is your purpose of life? What is your why? Why are you? What is it your purpose? And for me, I found that at 19 years old or 20 years old, and my purpose was to be of service.
Yeah.
And so I have continually looked for ways to be of service in my life since then, and it's been something that I don't know if I really understood it the moment I did it, the moment I wrote it down on this piece of paper, and I remember writing it on this piece of paper and sort of showing the other people that were there what my purpose was, and I remember saying it and feeling confident about it, but maybe not understanding it. But as the years have gone by, that really has become a central feature of my life. I mean, I am deeply committed to being of service. And one of that being of service, I was in the restaurant business, and I decided it was time to go to law school. Mm-hmm. My uncle, Pegram, who was a judge, who'd gotten me out of some of that trouble as a kid, who I'd always idolized, he's recently passed in the last year, who I'd always idolized and looked up to, also a man who was sober for many, many years, for more than 35 years, 40 years. Mm-hmm. I went to his house, in fact, on January 28th of 1986. I spent the weekend with him before I checked myself into treatment. And we talked, and he gave me this book I read that sort of changed my life and talked to me about me. He was really a mentor for me and a guide in my life. And I decided to go to law school, based in no small part on I miss him. I made a decision to go to law school based on who he was, who I'd seen him become in his life, getting sober, struggling with drugs and alcohol, getting sober, being this judge, being this member of the community, giving back, becoming an attorney, stepping down from the bench and becoming an attorney and practicing. And we had practiced together in a few cases. I had been in his office for the first 6 months of my having a law license. And we and so that's what brought me to law school, was this idea that I wanted to emulate my Uncle Pegram's behavior, his life, what he'd done, the way he was, the way that he was of service to his community, but also so that I could own my own being of service. And so that's what drove me to law school. And I had dropped out of high school. I quit high school in December of my senior year. I hadn't really attended classes since January or February of my junior year of high school. And I'd gotten my GED like the day I decided to quit school. The next day I went and took the GED test, and I passed it and got my high school degree. But I hadn't finished school, and I had played around with college at Middle Tennessee State University in Nashville in the 90s. But when I decided to go back to school in 1999, I declared academic bankruptcy, essentially, and just swiped the record clean. And I started off at LSU. Just one afternoon, I decided to go to school. Mm-hmm. And there's a pretty interesting little story about that. Actually, I had moved back to Louisiana. I had the thought of opening a restaurant, getting my parents to help with opening a restaurant. And I went to a food service convention. And there was a bunch of food service people around, and there was this really, really nice guy who was selling food to the restaurant that I was working at, I was managing at the time. He's a very, very nice fellow. And we were talking, and he invited me to this food service convention. We're looking around, and he said, "Hey, see that guy over there?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "He's the guy that I work for. He owns the food service company that I work for, you know." I was like, "Oh, no kidding." He said, "Yeah." He's like, "Man, that guy's got more money in his pocket than you and I'll ever have." And that statement, that one moment in time, it just hit me. It was one of those moments of clarity in life. I knew I was living smaller than my ability. I was settling for less than what I was capable of. And not that I had any judgment about the people around me. This man who was there was a wonderful person.
Yeah.
I had no reason to believe he was anything other than living a good life. I'm not insulting him in any way. But for me, it hit me that I was living a life that was sort of compromise, a life of compromise, a life of...
Yeah, it was like, I imagine for you, it was also very intellectually understimulating, knowing what I know about you and how our conversations go, your pursuit of, excellence in your career. That was very intellectually understimulating path.
And I'd had a couple of events in my life that had led to that, and reading theoretical physics and understanding and talking to people and thinking, well, everybody doesn't read these books and understand them. And I'd had some experiences of being able to understand complex ideas and complex concepts. And then I was in the restaurant business. And there's nothing wrong with that. My kids are in the restaurant business. I'm not putting down the restaurant business. One of my kids wants to be a chef. Cool. That's awesome, right? But it just, for me, I had a calling from something more. And in that one moment, it all came to like this point at that one moment when he said that to me. Mm-hmm. And I actually excused myself and said, "Man, I have to go. I'm sorry." I got in my car. I drove to LSU, walked into the admissions office and signed up for class. It was like the second day of class of the fall semester of 1999. And I didn't tell anybody. I didn't call my wife at the time. I didn't call my parents. I just went over there and signed up, took out a student loan for the cost of school, got my class schedule, drove home, and told my wife, "Hey, I signed up at LSU this morning. I got to go to class tomorrow." Because I knew in that moment that I drove and I parked that car and I walked on the way to that admissions office. I knew I'm going to finish my undergraduate degree and I'm going to go to law school. And I'm going to be a criminal defense attorney. Like there was no question. There wasn't any idea that it wasn't going to happen. I knew in that moment, it's time for me to go be an attorney. And the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to be a criminal defense attorney. Mm-hmm. And that began this process in the fall of '99.
Your call to service.
Yeah. And began this gift I've been given in life of actually being of service, and in this way of being an attorney. It's been an incredible journey for the last 15 years of practice, and that's kind of me. That's kind of what brought me to the place that I am today, and who I am today in terms of being a criminal defense attorney. What that means to me, to fight for people, to fight for the accused, to give people voice who don't have a voice, mm-hmm. to use my skill and understanding of the law and the process to fight for people. I tell people often that call me up, I know this feels like you've been thrown into the middle of a lake and you can't swim. and there's no, you have no idea how to get to the shore. You're getting ready to drown. You need somebody who can swim. You need somebody who's got a boat. You need somebody who can come out there with a life vest, whatever the case may be, and help you to shore, help you figure out how to get out of this situation. And it really makes my heart feel good that I can do that for people, that I can bring clarity, because as I've told you, and I know I've said this to you before, it's not just the accused. It's the accused's wife or husband, or their mother and father, or their children. There's so much that goes on when someone gets accused of a crime.
Yeah, there's ripple effects.
God, man, and those people don't deserve it. No matter what you think about the accused,
right?
The innocent people around them certainly don't deserve it. And being able to help the accused through that, to help the family members understand, to give them some insight into how the process is going to go, you know, that's really has been the manifestation of my being of service in my life. So that's what it means for me to be a criminal defense attorney, to help folks, to give back, to be of service to these people in difficult situations, and to bring a considerable amount of skill and experience to the table in doing so.
Oh, what a great story it is.
Thank you. So I know I've been talking forever. I like to talk, God knows. Why don't you tell us a little about Katie's life and where you came from, sweetheart, and what brought you to service? What drove you to this life of service that you've chosen to live?
Yeah, well, my story is so different from yours. I grew up with parents who were, by comparison, stable and, able to provide consistent care for me and, supervision, and who were really present emotionally and mentally. My parents did divorce when I was about 5 years old, and that was handled really beautifully. They lovingly co-parented. Very soon after their divorces, they both remarried to my mom to my stepfather, and my dad to my stepmother. And these people are my parents. My step-parents are my parents. Right. I am lucky I have two sets of parents that modeled love and stability and all these things. So yes, I'm a product of a broken household, if you will, but my mom and dad realizing that they weren't meant to be together and they needed to split to, help my sister and I avoid any conflict or tension. I mean, that was just such a healthy decision. And so then I was modeled what love looks like from each household.
And they're all still together.
And they're all still together.
It's been how long?
My mom and stepdad are still together.
More than 30 years.
30 plus years. Yeah. Same for dad and stepmom. Right. It feels weird for me to call them step parents, even, because they feel like they are my parents. Right. They feel like they're my biological parents, right. My step parents. The relationships I have with them are so strong. So that I had a very different upbringing in that regard. That's not to say, though, it wasn't without struggle for me. I started to really struggle with social anxiety from a very early age, elementary school, kindergarten, first, second grade, sometime around then. What that looks like. So social anxiety is the intense worries and fears and apprehension about meeting new people, public speaking, essentially engaging in any kind of conversation or experience with other people where you're also, not only are you afraid to engage with them, you're thinking about these interactions after the fact, like ad nauseum. You just cannot stop analyzing your part or what they said, but you're also assuming that the other person is evaluating you and judging you negatively, that you're screwing up or you're saying the wrong things or things like that. And so that was my brand growing up. And to some extent it still is. I've outgrown a lot of that, and I can share more about how I did that, but I really struggled with being a very anxious child. Sports helped. I did a lot of organized sports. I was very good at soccer. I played on a kind of advanced travel league from the time I was like in third, 4th and 5th grade, up through middle school. Then I transitioned to playing competitive volleyball, and I played super competitive volleyball, both in my school, but then in a traveling club team, we played nationally. And so those organized sports helped me with my confidence. They helped me with practicing, my social skills. My social skills were always intact. It might be actually a myth that people who are socially anxious are like clumsy or not able to communicate well. I think that's does not represent who I am. I've always been, I think, graceful socially.
The inner story didn't match the outward. The inner anxiety story didn't match the outward expression of your social skill, the way that you were socially.
Yeah, and that's true of what research shows about social anxiety. When you have people who are socially anxious do like a little mock or even a real like little presentation, and then you have audience members rate them, the socially anxious person who is presented rates themselves as far worse. I mean, just tanks themselves across the board on how they think they did and how, liked they were compared to the audience members who find them to be, fine or even better than fine. That is a feature of social anxiety.
Oh, wow. So it's the self-story.
It's a self-story.
Oh, wow.
And so, yeah, I know I have social grace, but I didn't always think that. I thought I was maybe clumsy or not tactful. And so, along the way, my involvement in sports really helped me solidify that, I am liked. I am not being perceived negatively. I was the captain of the volleyball team for my my senior year, and so that was, just another affirmation that I'm a good leader. People like me. My teammates like me.
And this social anxiety that you had as a young person, this is the kind of thing that caused you some headache, heartache, sadness. I mean, this is not something that was fleeting, right? This was something that was pretty tough, right? As a young, I would think as a young person, if you didn't think you fit in, I've always been really easy social with people, and I've always felt very comfortable around folks generally.
Yeah.
I would think that not feeling that way would be really hard. I mean, that would be legitimately keep me up at night.
Yeah, I mean, it did. It kept me up. It caused, for a lot of folks, not for a lot, I think for most folks, there's this wonderful body of research that's validating us silent sufferers like myself, which is looking at the psychoneuroendocrinology. That's really the combination of the brain, the immune system, the gut health, all of these parts of us that are so interconnected. We don't have this separation between our brain and the rest of our body. There's the duality of it all.
There's physical symptoms to this anxiety.
Absolutely.
Upset stomach, ulcers, or whatever, even brain chemistry, even things like that. Really?
Yeah, so that was profound for me when I realized that all of these things were interconnected, probably around the time I was a freshman or sophomore in college, and I started taking advanced psychology courses. And I realized that, all of these things are super interconnected, especially the gut and the brain. Because for so many years in my childhood, we didn't know what was wrong with me. I was such a somatic, meaning bodily manifestation of my anxiety. And so tummy aches, headaches, all these things.
Constant.
I kept a food journal. My pediatricians didn't know what was wrong with me. They thought maybe I had food allergies. We did an elimination diet where you cut out foods, and nobody knew until later. It was like, that's IBS. That's irritable bowel syndrome. You got these tummy troubles throughout your childhood, and that was the seriousness of my anxiety. And my parents didn't know. If they did, they would have immediately,
of course.
Had me in therapy, which would have helped, but. We didn't know that back in the day, in ye olden days, as my children like to point out.
Hilarious.
So yeah, that was my struggle, which is such a connection point for us, is that the etiology, meaning the underlying cause of our emotional difficulties, was so different. We just came from such different backgrounds. But
the two of us.
Yeah.
Right, of course, yeah.
But we both have struggled in very different ways. So by the time I get to college, I'm able to really work on these things. I'm understanding what's going on, and that felt so validating. And then by the time I get to grad school, things have really improved for me. My social anxiety is still there, but you start in most PhD programs in the psychology field, you're teaching. You're teaching to undergrads. That's part of your duties. Is you're a teacher. You're an undergraduate instructor, and so that of course helps.
Of course.
Mine was never public speaking. Mine was always my flavor of social anxiety. That is, it wasn't public speaking so much as the sort of the perception that others were evaluating me very negatively, that I was viewed as incompetent, that I was viewed as, maybe odd or strange. So
how have you mitigated some of those? Because those, I'm just assuming, I don't know. These things sort of stick around, right? They don't just magically go away. But I don't. Although I see some of that in your current life, we have these conversations sometimes. How have you mitigated that or controlled some of that social anxiety or some of the anxiety that you have writ large?
Yeah, a lot of it is cognitive behavioral work. It's cognitive, meaning your thoughts and your thinking processes, and behavioral is how you are. Oftentimes with anxiety, you're either avoiding things or maybe engaging in some kind of a compulsive behavior to alleviate the anxiety. For folks with social anxiety, it's usually a lot of avoidant behaviors. No, I'm not gonna go to that event, or I don't want to give a presentation, right? So you're avoiding that behavior.
I see.
So for me, it was using these CBT, cognitive behavior therapy techniques, on myself, and then eventually working with a therapist, more so to process life stressors, but just to kind of solidify some of those CBT things that I'd already learned along the way. Talking with my mom about her own experiences was really validating. My mother suffered with anxiety that was even more crippling than mine. And so hearing her experiences was like, oh, wow, I don't feel so alone.
And you had a remarkably successful professional woman.
My mother.
Yes. And
yes.
Profoundly successful, like really successful professional woman.
Yes. She has a PhD in neuropsychopharmacology. She taught it. She was a professor at Wake Forest for many years. Brilliant woman. And
yet debilitating anxiety.
Absolutely debilitating, to the point where she had stomach ulcers that bled.
It's amazing. I just, it's funny because you think, well, somebody's got this thing, then it'll just interfere with their life. But no, it's this beautiful, really successful life, but on board this really difficult anxiety,
Yeah. And so the anxiety just, it looks so different for every person. Sometimes for you and I, that I need reassurance. And clinically, what we call that is an excessive need for reassurance. That's actually one of the symptoms. I know I'm doing it. I need to put it in check. A lot of times I try, but as my partner, I'm telling you, I need a little reassurance.
And I'm here for it.
And you do. You get it. You know my brand now. You've known it for a long time. But so, the coping skills came along the way for me. And I remember when I first got hired on with NOPD, the New Orleans Police Department, to be their police psychologist. This was a big government contract, and you submit an RFP, a request for a proposal. That's a big package you put together for why you want to win this bid. And this was a really big deal, and I thought it was kind of a shot in the dark for me. And I was like, what the hell, I'm just going to put this out there. I had done a lot of this work in my graduate training and my postdoctoral training, where I was evaluating public safety candidates, police officer candidates, federal candidates for federal positions like Homeland Security, FBI.
Yeah.
So I was doing a lot of that in my postdoctoral training, and I knew that I was good at this. I knew I could do this. I submit my proposal, and I get an interview with the city of New Orleans and NOPD jointly. And my first thought was, this can't be right. Something's wrong here.
Oh, wow.
I felt like an imposter, like surely they didn't mean to give that interview to me.
This is a mix-up of some kind.
This is a mix-up. I go in for the interview, and I could tell it went great. They liked me. I liked them. It was a very good rapport. It was a really good fit. I explained my methodology, how I would evaluate candidates, and how we, what kinds of things we look for for risk factors. And I got called back for a second interview, and I had the same experience. Even though it went well, I disregarded that data that there was a great rapport. I selected my anxious thoughts over this wealth of data. And so
even thoughts sometimes that don't match what happened.
Yeah.
Some made up stuff.
Well, it wasn't necessarily made up. It was, I would look for small cues oh, that guy was looking down. So. And
then you'd add information to, he was looking down because of X, Y, or Z, negative for you.
Yeah, it's two things. It's what we call magnifying. So I would take a magnifying glass on something that was seemingly small or an irrelevant detail. So maybe one of the council, members at the table was looking down, and I would put a magnifying glass on that and blow it up. And then the second part was what you described as mind reading. Then I would ascribe some kind of meaning to his behavior without checking the evidence.
And a negative meaning toward you.
And a negative mening towards me.
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
my brand, social
that's the
anxiety.
Deal. That's what social anxiety looks like.
That's the deal.
No, that's interesting.
So I won the contract. For the first 6 months, I went to every conference I could. I really, on police psychology, I attended, any seminar that was available. I reread all the textbooks I'd already read. I contacted test publishers, and I called them, and I made sure. I just wanted to make sure I was doing everything by national standards that a police psychologist who was at a massive department like LAPD or Chicago PD, I wanted to be doing what they did. And despite doing all those things and making myself the best I could be, I still had the thought of something's not right here. You shouldn't be doing this.
Wow. Yeah, that's really something. That's really something. And that's the feature. That's what social anxiety is.
That was part of it. But part of that's a double-edged sword. It motivates me to be the best I can be.
Sure.
I'm not going to leave any stone unturned.
There's a positive side of that.
Yeah,
behavior.
I mean, I called up a psychologist from the Chicago Police Department, and I said, hey, you don't know me, but I've listened to you present before, and I'm curious. I want to use this measure, or, what do you think about if I do this versus this in my methodology? And this guy called me up, and we talked for an hour. And he's like, yeah, you're right on with what we do here at our department. I know the guys or the gals at LAPD, psychology department with them. I know that they're doing this, and it was such a validation.
Oh, that's great.
So
that's really cool.
It serves as a motivator for me to really push myself and really not rest on my laurels.
That's really great. And you also, to live with you, we co-occupied this home together. I notice how you're very structured.
Yes.
You're very structured structure comforts you to have a sort of thing to do. Okay, now I'm going to go do this, and now I'm going to go do this, and now I'm going to do this, and just so happens that I really like that too. So it works really well for different reasons. I really like structure, but can you talk a little about how that's been relieving to the social anxiety as well? Because I know we've fallen out of structure because for a long time we were doing long distance relationship.
Yeah.
That got you out of your routine.
Yes.
And I remember you expressing to me, wow, this is unsettling to my body and my life because I'm so reliant on my routine for comfort or for managing your anxiety. Is that true? Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's very accurate. The routine for me is a source of stability. It's knowing what to predict. I tend to go to this idea of if I don't know what to predict, that becomes stressful. And that's something I continually work on, is letting go of that and saying, okay, go with the flow. You and I are so yin and yang on that. You are the king of go with the flow, which is such a positive impact on me, where in those moments I can say, okay, we don't have to do anything in that time space. You know, we don't have to fill it in, which isn't to say I always do that. I'm perfectly fine with downtime, but
Right. I like a schedule, but some of my schedule is do whatever. Do whatever happens in the next 3 hours. Like,
that's
it's true. It's true.
scheduled downtime.
It's true. I do like a schedule. I like it, but a lot of my schedule is whatever. Okay, this is whatever time where we can do whatever we want. It's really funny.
Yeah.
I'm kind of like that. It's very much a feature of my life.
I like the predictability. It's very helpful. So much of our careers are based on meetings and deadlines, and for me, it's hard to switch over to an unstructured personal life when you go from your professional life, which is incredibly structured, both of us.
Right.
And so I thrive on a really solid schedule, even if it's just, hey, Saturday's a free day. We're not going to do anything on Saturday. Knowing that, it's like, all right, cool. That's great. We're gonna chill.
We're gonna have a day where we just like free flow and do whatever comes and whatever feels like it's a fun thing to do.
Yeah,
or interesting,
and there's a give and take.
But we always go to the gym.
Yes, we do.
We always eat good. We eat well. We go to the grocery. We make a meal or something together. So there's some things we do. Like even on those days where we're not being super productive and we're going and like going on a hike. Or we're going and getting something done around the house, or even on a day where we're kind of chill, we still have some things that we are really set in. I mean, we don't miss the gym.
Yeah, that's true. And I don't want to sound like I'm like some taskmaster where I'm constantly tasking you with things.
You're not that.
No, I try to approach things in a way where I suggest like, hey, would you want to go do this on Saturday, or this is upcoming. And I'm malleable. I try to be.
You are. No, you are.
There's a few things that we're really rigid on, which is our gym schedule and our eating schedule. We're pretty rigid on that. And what we eat healthily. And
we've fallen into like the days of the gym: morning, afternoon, morning. Like we know what we're going to. Generally, when we're going to be in the gym, what we're doing.
But being malleable is such an important part in our relationship, and it's a feature of really healthy relationships, I find, where you have people with disparate personalities. You're the yin to my yang. You're very easy and laid back and go with the flow. I like to know what's coming up, and so for each of us to compromise is, I think, what makes us very successful. Because we're really sweet about it. When one of us is like, I'm not really sure I want to do that, we have a discussion, we talk about it, and it's thoughtful. Because
I'm really into saying, okay, cool. I tell you the other day, I love the production feature of your personality. The part of you that loves to get things done. Is fun for me, and then I just request one thing, and it's. I want an attaboy, if I'm doing it. Like, I just like, I'm a really simple man. I want to go do something, and then I want to look at you and be like, look what I just did. I want you to be like, oh, honey, that was great. Thank you. It's like, if you just tell me, like, oh, you did a great job, I'm super into doing things. Like, But it's funny how we both know ourselves so well, I think. We're both very confident people, and we know who we are. And so it's really been easy for me to say something silly to you like, I like attaboys. I like for you to come and say to me, oh, honey, that was great that you did that, or wow, that was really cool. I do the same to you. Because it's natural for me to give back what I want, right? I want attaboys, so I'm always giving you atta-girls. I'm like, oh, honey, that was great. Thanks for doing that. Or every time you load the dishwasher or clean this or do that, I'm like, oh, honey, thank you for doing that. That was awesome. Really appreciate it. And
those are two concepts that I actually bring up a lot in couples therapy, which is expressing gratitude for your partner, even when it's the small things, even when it's the things that you kind of expect them to do, like when you take out the trash and you come back in and I give you an attaboy.
I love it.
It feels good. It's the same principle at work. We love it when our boss says to us, hey, you did a great job on that project. Your kids love it when you say to them, nice job, buddy, or you did great on that thing. It never stops feeling good at any age to get that. The gratitude, but then also expressing your needs to your partner. As we get into long-term relationships, there's this mind reading that occurs, which is, well, they know how I feel. They know how I feel about them. I don't need to say that. Or they should know. They should know me so well that, he should know that I need reassurance. But instead, we don't want to do that. I try to coach couples away from that, which is keep saying your needs. And I'll say to you, I need reassurance right now.
You do, and it's really cool.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh yeah, let's go. Like, yeah. What do you need reassurance on? Like, I'm here. I'm ready to do it. It's funny because the other day we were talking about taskmaster stuff, and you were doing something about, like, I don't want to be a taskmaster, and I was like, tell me what you want me to do. Like, I love doing things for you. It makes me feel good.
I know.
It makes me feel good to do stuff for you. It makes me feel good to be useful, to feel like I'm being a good man or a good partner. It makes me feel good to do that stuff. And I know that sounds super simple and silly. Like, it sounds like I'm an automaton or like I'm a useless, goofball. Like, what do you want me to do, honey? But why not? I mean, it's awesome. I love it.
I have referred to you as my golden retriever husband. You are.
I like it. I like to do things.
You
I like
are.
to feel useful. I like to feel like I'm doing sweet things for you.
Yeah.
I especially love it when I do something sweet and then you're like, oh, honey, thank you. And you give me sweet kisses. And I'm like, oh, this is really great. It's a great construct. I get to do these things and then I get lovey, results from it. It's really awesome.
It's a good dynamic, and I love doing this in the couples world and in the couples therapy world, and seeing couples start to shift their relationship based on just a few of these little principles that they can do really easily. And they come back and they're like, things don't feel as adversarial. Things don't feel as confrontational. We're on the same team, or we're starting to feel like we're on the same team.
And we have collisions, to be clear. I mean, we're a couple. We're two adult, grown-up human beings who've come together, in life more than when we were teenagers. And so we've come into this relationship with a past and with behaviors and with thoughts and beliefs and ideas. And we are really congruent on a lot of stuff.
Yes.
In fact, it's surprising how congruent we are on things.
Yeah.
On beliefs and values and those kinds of things. But there are some where we're not as congruent, and sometimes that leads to difficulty. One of the other features of our relationship is that I think we're incredibly good at getting through difficulty.
Yeah.
We're both very tender with each other. We're even if we get off the tender track, it's very easy to get both of us back on the tender track and say, hey, I mean, we have this funny thing where we say to each other, we're on the same team. When one of us is like, when I start to like argue a point or like I start to cross-examine, she's like, we're on the same team. I'm like, oh yeah, I don't have to cross-examine you.
Yeah, you become litigator.
It's hilarious.
Yeah.
But that's a really great little trigger, great little thing for us to realize, like, oh, I don't, like, okay, stop.
Yeah. Stop
being adversarial. Like, this is silly. And it's the same thing I say to you sometimes. Hey, we're on the same team. Hey, we're on the same. Just tell me what you want me to do. Like, what can I do to assuage your upset, or what can I do to make it better, or what can I do to be, like. And it's not that you're upset a lot. It's just that I think when that occurs, when either of us is in that space, we're super tender about it. And I think that's really neat because we come from such different places.
Right.
Right. And we thought about talking about that too, about how despite the fact that our pasts are so different and we come from different places, we've had such different experiences in life.
Yeah.
Our experiences in life have been growth processes for both of us. No matter how, it's like that thing we talked about earlier about my dad, comparing his young life to ours, and then early on, years ago, him saying these things like, well, it wasn't that bad. Like, I didn't beat the hell out of y'all. That's what I experienced. It's like, okay, I get that. Thank God. I really appreciate that you didn't kick the shit out of me as a child. Thanks.
Yeah.
I'm glad I didn't have to experience that. But it was still really hard for me in the way that whatever way it was hard, and for whatever way it was hard for you, it was, and you learned from that, and you brought away life lessons from that. And I think that's a really great message for people to hear, that it's not about who had the worst life or who had the more difficulty or the challenge.
Right.
Those psychological injuries and harms and challenges in life are monumental in whatever space you're in.
Yeah, those kind of serve to diminish the other person's experiences. Well, you didn't have it as hard as me, or you didn't have these things going on. It really I think minimizes the degree of difficulty that person or adversity that they experienced. And so that's one thing I work on a lot one-on-one in one-on-one therapy, is to, especially when I'm working with someone and they are saying, I've got these things going on, but these people have it so much worse than me. So they're minimizing their own experiences, not minimizing someone else's.
I'm sure the other way too,
It
right?
goes both ways.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, and so that's challenging to.
I shouldn't feel this way because it's not that bad.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's like, well, no,
Yeah.
wait, no, be graceful
Right.
with yourself. And that's I think a great message too, is be graceful with yourself, be graceful with your partner, be graceful with the people around you, the people at work.
Yeah.
For me, it's be graceful with my clients, even the ones that are maybe have done some really terrible stuff, and really
Yeah.
made some really bad choices in life and really damaged humans. I still try to be graceful to them,
Mm-hmm.
I still, I've represented some people that were just plain terrible and did some really
Yeah.
terrible things. And after they're found guilty at trial, or after they plead to 100 years, I put my hand on their shoulder and I tell them, I wish you well, I hope that the consequences that you have go okay,
Yeah.
because they're still human beings.
Right.
They still deserve some understanding and grace. They still deserve some kindness,
Yeah.
They're not throwaway people, and I'm pivoting back to this life of service. For me, that includes, I've had clients that have gotten 100 years. I've had clients that have gotten multiple life sentences. I've had clients, and I've talked to those people post conviction, post representation, post being paid for their representation.
Yeah.
And I was a public defender for 10 years, so I had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of cases that I did for a pittance, for really almost no money at all. And I cared about those people, I cared about their humanity for humanity's sake. And for me, it always felt like a reflection of me, how I treated them, not a reflection of who they were.
Yeah.
Not a reflection of what they did, not a reflection of what conduct had gotten them in the moment they were in, even some of the most heinous conduct. My treatment of them was a reflection of who I was as a human being, not who they were. Well, I think that's about who we are, sweetheart.
Yes, that's about it.
I think that's a good place to stop and to complete our podcast on who we are as a couple, who we have been as professionals, and how we found our way in life to our professional lives. One of the core beliefs, core values both of us have is being of service to people and living a life of service, and so it is both what we do professionally, and it's frankly what we do here. It's the reason that we've decided to do this podcast, and so that we can bring some understanding maybe to some difficult concepts in the criminal justice system and psychology, and throughout the entire process of criminal defense and criminal justice and forensic psychology, and maybe shed some light on some of what goes on in the world in that regard. I think we're going to talk about the Menendez case on our next podcast, because we watched the documentary. Of course, all the stuff's happening with this resentencing. We not to give away the punchline, but we are pretty collectively happy about these young men maybe getting an opportunity to live a life out of
Don't
jail.
miss this next episode.
I think
The
it'll be
next
great.
one's going to be great.
I think
I
it'll be
feel
very
like,
interesting.
yeah, we're going to really go into great detail
Yes.
about this Menendez story.
Yeah, we have some really
Yeah.
interesting information about the psychologists in that trial.
Yes.
About what occurred there and how incredibly outside of the norm that was
Yeah.
in that trial. And so stay tuned for that. Look out for it. It'll be out pretty soon, next few days probably. And thank you for joining us.